And good morning to you guys. It's Monday here in Minnesota. The first real chills kind of set in here. We had some snow last month, but we've had some pretty decent weather the last 30 days or so. And today it was 12 degrees this morning, I believe, Fahrenheit. That's pretty chilly, but we're warm inside. The heater's working up here now, which is nice. Last winter was pretty cold in this room. We did 12 Savoy records I love that were obvious, and then 12 Savoy records I love that were a little less obvious. And I was thinking about doing a 12 rare Savoys, but the viewership wasn't great for the second volume, so I hate to make decisions based on that. And maybe I'll still do 12 more rare Savoys at some point, but a lot of the rare ones I've showed you in other places anyway, so I'm moving on. And we're going to do 12 Blue Notes. Actually, I think it's 15 Blue Notes that I love. And these aren't the most obvious. There's no Blue Train here. There's no something else, Cannonball Adderley here. It's a little bit deeper stuff. But it's still pretty obvious because it's the main trunk of artists that huddled in Blue Note. The Blue Note masses, as it were. It's just, you get away from Blue Note, listen to other labels for a little bit, and you come back and you're always just really impressed by the body of work and dedication that Blue Note and Alfred Lion just really had towards this amazing legacy. And it's interesting to think about how Blue Note doesn't really even seek out that older generation of player. They have Bud Powell very early on, and they bring him back towards the end of his life for a few more sessions in like 58. But for the most part, it's not like Blue Note was reintroducing Swing Cats. There's no records from like just the giants that are out there, Lester Young, Dizzy Gillespie. You know, they're not going out and finding any of those guys and bringing them in and signing them, which Prestige and Riverside do that. You know, those guys made records at the young labels. But Blue Note pretty much stayed to its core group and core sound. And we're going to first look at some stuff from the 1500 series that I love, starting with one of my favorite records and one of my favorite covers. This great Thad Jones record, number 1527. For me, this is one of the really great first early Blue Note albums. A lot of the early stuff up into 1520 is kind of reissued 10-inch stuff. Still great stuff. And then they start doing some stuff in the 20s that's new works. But this here is a real cohesive piece with one of the greatest album covers in the canon, if you ask me. Thad Jones is one of the unheralded trumpet players of that crossover era from swing into bebop and hard bop. And he's not really a hard bop guy. He doesn't even surround himself with the young hard bop stable. He's more in the tradition. I had a little cough there, sorry. He's more in the tradition of the early trumpet greats, the Harry Sweets Edisons, the Roy Eldridges. He's got plenty of capability to release fire, but he's also a very melodically centered player, and is always looking for the melody and a hummable structure. And as I've said before, he played with Count Basie for a long time. He arranged a lot of great Basie tracks and sessions. I often went uncredited as the arranger of some great Basie sessions. He deserves more recognition than he gets. He's a really wonderful kind of crossover figure in the history of the music. And Alfred Lion recognized his ability and talent pretty quickly. And I think he has 4 records on Blue Note. They're all come pretty, maybe 3, and they all come pretty early. And he continues to make great work into the 60s and 70s with Mel Lewis, and you can't go wrong with Thad Jones as far as I'm concerned. The second record I want to cover, number 1534. And Blue Note at this point is really starting to hit a stride. And about 20 releases from this, they start making knockout record after knockout record for a number of years. And it's not like there's a bunch of misses here in the 1530s and 40s. It's just they're not quite the legendary status of what happens in the 1550s, 1560s, 1570s, into the early 4000s up to 4150 or so. It's just such consistent, high-level, classic, in retrospect, jazz. And as I've said many times, it was kind of unknown and unheralded at the time. It wasn't like Blue Note had this big acclaim in 1956. People didn't know who they were across the country. Even in jazz circles, jazz was very regional. If you were a college kid in the Pacific Coast listening to Shelly Manne and Dave Brubeck, you didn't know much about Blue Note at all. You know, it was a very regional thing. But Blue Note, in retrospect, has become just this icon. And a lot of it is the integrity. It's just a high level of integrity. Paul Chambers is one of the great bass players in the music. He propels hundreds of sessions from his giant 6'5" stature, plucking on that bass, bowing often. His name is attached to so many of the great recordings of the mid-50s, late 50s, and mid-60s. He's just a giant. This is sessions with Donald Byrd, John Coltrane, Kenny Burrell, Horace Silver, and Philly Joe Jones, which makes it a pretty fun record. Coltrane does maybe 5 records as a sideman at Blue Note. And I think, interestingly enough, that had he not had the great success with Miles Davis and been propelled into his career at Impulse, where he was given such freedom that he tinkered with all of the rules, had he not had that stardom and that mantle placed on him, there's a potential second path his career could have taken Coltrane. And had he stayed more with these hard bop cats and made more records at Blue Note, it would have been interesting to hear where his career could have gone in that direction. Because I think he was a great hard bop player. He's one of the great emoters of all time. You know, the level of integrity of John Coltrane is MLK-like. He's just a prophet. Donald Byrd, of course, is one of the great trumpet players of this or any era. Kenny Burrell is absolutely one of my favorite guitar players. Silver and Philly Joe keep the groove going behind, obviously, Paul Chambers. And Paul is a great player. He can really do some interesting stuff in the forefront at times when he wants to. Again, picking a Lee Morgan record wasn't easy. I just tried to pick one I haven't featured as much. This is Lee Morgan Volume 3. And Lee Morgan is another one of the great trumpet players of this era. He's capable of playing a very sweet, melancholic ballad as he is here when he wants to. I've said many times, Lee Morgan's one of the most acerbic, aggressive players in the hard bop movement. He feels very militant to me very frequently. But here in this setting, they're playing this lovely ballad. I Remember Clifford, yeah. And it's just beautiful. Wynton Kelly's on the piano, and Wynton Kelly's always going to give a kind of confined arrangement to a group. He's a very rhythmic, pulsing player, rooted in R&B and the blues. Paul Chambers on the bass, Charlie Persip's on the drums, and Persip doesn't make a lot of appearances at Blue Note. He has a record as a leader on Bethlehem, by the way, that's really hard to find, but it's actually really great. And that Persip record has some young players on it. I believe a young Freddie Hubbard might even be on it, if I recall. My memory's going. But Gigi Grice and Benny Golson are the horn players on this, next to Lee Morgan, and tenor and alto, of course. And it's composed and arranged here by Benny Golson. So some of the setting that we're hearing, that's the influence of Benny Golson. Generally speaking, when Morgan's calling the shots, the tempos are high and bright, everything's brittle and breakable and full of death and destruction on the doorstep. With Golson's leadership here, in spite of it being a Lee Morgan record, it definitely gives it more of a melancholic and arranged type of setting. And Morgan thrives in that setting. He's really great as constraining himself when he needs to or wants to. One of the great album covers of all time. I've been asked numerous times whether this or the Joe Wilder record album cover came first, and they're both pretty synonymous time frame wise. I think I have the Joe Wilder right here. Or is it not? It's in my other section. But it's a great album cover. Reed Miles, of course. And it's fun to hear a guy like Morgan playing with Grice and Golson. Again, those two are much more compositionally driven, much more about advanced arrangements where things have a design to them. And putting that little bit of bridle on a guy like Lee Morgan can be very fruitful. It's a bit like hearing Coltrane play with Ellington. Ellington put that bridle on, and you were able to see a whole nother side of John Coltrane when he played with Duke Ellington. A side that you certainly didn't see on Blue Train, or on Black Pearls, or any of his prestige stuff for that matter. This is one of my favorite Johnny Griffin records. He makes probably 4 records for Blue Note in the 1500 series before he moves over to Riverside. And one of the things I like about Blue Note is I'm so familiar with these records. Unlike some of the labels where some of the stuff's still newer to me and less known, I know most of these artists and most of their careers pretty well at this point. And so I don't have to sit and do a bunch of research. I can just talk off the cuff on a lot of these. Great album cover, by the way. I think this one's also called A Blowing Session. And again, it's got Mobley, Griffin, Lee Morgan, and Coltrane. And what's fun about that is you got 3 tenor guys. You got Coltrane, Hank Mobley, and Johnny Griffin. And they all play very differently. Griffin plays lightning fast and kind of mid sound. Hank has that smooth, creamy tone, and Coltrane is blustered and full of angst and piss and vinegar. Wynton Kelly, Paul Chambers, and our BLAKEY are laying down the percussion, and those 3 are just hammering out tracks. They're just hammering them out. And if I remember, Lee Morgan's on the trumpet. And so you have 4 of the great horn players in jazz on this one session. And again, it's part of what's crazy about Blue Note. It's just every record has such an incredible lineup. Album after album after album. And again, that wasn't necessarily the case at the time, but they've all become legends. And it's not just because they're on Blue Note. It's because these are some of the most high integrity players the music's ever seen. And the leeway that Alfred Lion gives these guys to express and to emote completely honestly. It's a bit like a record label allowing some young rappers in the early 90s to say exactly what's on their mind. It's got a potency and a value due to that honesty that is so more important than some of the other things that we think of that matter in music. Art needs to be driven by honesty and compulsion and a need to share. And these guys all have such a hunger. And unlike Herman Lubinsky at Savoy, who we just talked about, Alfred Lion wanted these guys to be as vitriolic, as honest, as black, as angry, as political, as socially and culturally challenged. He knows the vitality of this music is in the unwatered down, the undiluted message of these black men sharing their angst. It wasn't about confining them and bridling them and having them reduce what they're saying so they don't offend anybody. Don't do Christmas songs. You don't got to do a bunch of Broadway songs. We're not worried about what the big movie hits were. Just play, compose, write, rehearse, and express yourself. As long as it's got that pulsing thing that, as a little Jewish guy, I can feel that genuine nature. That's the barometer. And without that license that Alfred Lion gives these guys to be this, Blue Note is a Blue Note. That's an incredibly important thing to remember. Is that without what Alfred Lyon's allowing them to do, this legacy doesn't have the same power. I almost forgot to talk about this record, 1560. It's probably the first great Hank Mobley record. He makes some great stuff for Savoy, and he has a couple of Prestige that are really good records. And his first 3 or 4 sessions at Blue Note are great blowing sessions, but they're a little less focused, and they don't quite ascend to the place where this one does. Number 1560, with Donald Byrd, John Jenkins, Bobby Timmons, Wilbur Ware, and Philly Joe Jones. Again, great cover. This is one of those classic records, 200 gram, that came out back in the early thousands, probably late 90s. And I've had my Blue Note library for a long time. So like I said, I've had a really chance to get to know and feel the emoting and the tonality and the expressive nature and the personality of these guys. And that's a lot of what it takes to get to know jazz, is you have to get to know a guy's personality. Without knowing who a guy is, you can't really hear what he's saying to you. And that's such an important thing. And that's part of my revelation with Miles Davis. And I'm not going to go on about Miles Davis right now. But when you realize how much a personality impacts what a guy is saying and where he's coming from and how he's playing, who Miles Davis is can't help but dictate what he's saying to us. And likewise, a guy like Mobley, with his kind of laid back, we're going to figure this out, a bit of the Louis Armstrong forgiveness. Mobley is such a giant. This is such a great record. Original of this go for literally thousands of dollars any day of the week. And everyone who's a collector of jazz's dream is to walk into an old barn, attic, or basement and stumble on a box of old Blue Note records and hope that they're playable. The demand for these records, and the Japanese came in the 90s and bought all of them. You know, all the Blue Note, all the jazz that was sitting around, pop, a lot of rock stuff too. They bought a lot of used vinyl. They'd come over and ship pallets of it back, and they hit every city. You know, you talk to record store owners anywhere in this country, the Japanese cleaned house here, as most Americans were dumping their vinyl, and they were buying their CDs, and they were done with records. The Japanese knew something was up, and they bought that stuff, pennies on the dollar, and a lot of it still is sitting in Japan in collections, and some still in stores, being resold. People pass away, whatever. This is the great Curtis Fuller, along with Mobley, along with Byrd. A lot of these guys matriculate through the Jazz Messengers. Our BLAKEY, Horace Silver. It's just this huge lineage. All of you guys who are longtime watchers of the network know all about Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers. But for those of you who are newer to it, so much of the Blue Note family tree shoots off from the fantastic Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers family tree. And Fuller, of course, was the great trombone player who joins the Messengers at probably 59, 60, and stays for quite a while and expands it to a sextet. And all the stuff with Fuller in the group is fantastic. He's the great trombone player on the Coltrane Blue Train record. This session is, I think, his first at Blue Note. 1567. It's got Hank Mobley, Bobby Timmons, Paul Chambers, and Art Taylor. And of course, Timmons and Fuller and Mobley were all Jazz Messenger alumni. One of the first original Blue Notes I found was this one. I found it in a record store. There's a little water damage on the back down there. And so I got it for a pretty good price 15 years ago. Probably 20 bucks or so, which you think about that record today, and even in this condition, it'd probably easily be a $200 record now. But Fuller's a great player, one of the most expressive trombone players in the hard bop era. And I wanted to pick Sonny Clark, Sonny's Crib with Coltrane, but I feature that record so much. I think it's one of the landmark records of 57, 58, and it's a hallmark signature sound of what Blue Note hard bop sounds and looks like. But Sonny Clark has so many good records that you can't really go wrong with any of these early. Dial S for Sonny, Sonny Clark, Art Farmer, Curtis Fuller, Hank Mobley, Wilbur Ware, and a very young Louis Hayes. It's just, again, the royalty of Blue Note, album after album, is really unrivaled. Sonny Clark, to me, along with our BLAKEY, is hard bop. Sonny Clark's a piano player from the Pittsburgh area, if I recall. He was on the West Coast for a long time as well. I do know that. And he ends up playing with some interesting people on the West Coast before he comes east and really kind of changes his sound. And he has this aggressive, tactile, rhythmic approach. And it seems like it's more even his personality that has an aggressive, political, socially conscious militancy that impacts all the sessions he's on. And next to Horace Silver, in the late 50s, Sonny Clark's probably on as many Blue Notes as anybody, maybe more than Silver, because Silver starts doing his own thing pretty quickly. And Silver was very smooth and groove and rhythm, and Clark's a little bit more of an attacking, percussive, militant playing. And again, I think his modus operandi was a very socially conscious, driven. Every record he's on, no matter who the leader is, that record is almost always going to be a great hard bop record. And he's one of the true emissaries of the hard bop sound. A fantastic record. And I believe it's the last of the 1500s I'm going to show you. 1581, Sonny Rollins. And Rollins is in a very dynamic part of his career here. This is with Wilbur Ware and Alvin Jones, and Donald Bailey and Pete LaRocca sit in on a couple tracks in place of the bass and drums here. Night at the Village Vanguard, I believe it was from two different nights, if I recall. But it's, boy, what an expressive Rollins we have here. Rollins, like Coltrane here, seems to have endless ideas. And he's just emoting and sharing, and it's just pouring out of him, which is a far departure from what he's going to do on the Bridge or Way Out West, where those records feel like they have some commerciality to them and are kind of governed, embodied by a composition and arrangement and studio production and oversight. At Blue Note, you hear a side of Rollins you don't get really anywhere else. And this, to me, is one of the highlights of Rollins' career. He's just, like I said, on fire. He sounds potent. He sounds focused. And unlike Coltrane, there's occasional moments where Rollins seems a bit going through the motions or disinterested at times, depending on what period, what era you're talking about. I think that's why he leaves jazz for numerous times and then works on himself and comes back. Boy, right here he feels like he's on a very focused trajectory, and the band just churns along, and it's truly one of the great Blue Note titles and one of the highlights of young Mr. Rollins' career. And Rollins is still with us. I would argue he's probably the greatest living jazz legend alive. That's a tough bill to put on somebody, but for my money, he's a pretty big name that even people outside of jazz are somewhat familiar with. So Donald Byrd has a long career. He's a jazz messenger in '56. He does some stuff at the Transition label in '55, '56. He has some stuff, of course, at Savoy, which we talked about the other day. But it's when he comes to Blue Note as a leader where his career really takes the shape of what it's going to be. And he stays with Blue Note into the 70s, and he makes this incredible string of records. This is one of the great album covers, Byrd in hand, and Charlie Rouse is on this, of Jazz Mode's fame at this point. He has not yet started to play with Monk, but he's about to. Pepper Adams, who's a Detroit alumni of Byrd's, him and Pepper play together on a lot of stuff. Pepper's a baritone sax player, and they just have this great simpatico where they just feel linked at the hip. Walter Davis Jr., Sam Jones, and Art Taylor round out the rhythm section. And Sam Jones is really a Riverside studio bassist. You don't see him at Blue Note very often, but Byrd has this clarity, this structuring to how he plays. He doesn't ever overblow. He doesn't ever lose control. He doesn't ever let an idea run beyond where he can still emote and express. He's got a very controlled, finite style to him. Sometimes you feel like Morgan, his ideas go beyond where his breath can take him. And so it almost tails off. And Miles Davis seems listless and directionless at times. Byrd seems so concise, and he knows exactly how much breadth he has, and he's going to make every note within that frame feel of value. That's one of the things that makes Byrd special to me, is how carefully chosen his phrases are, and how well he handles the entire thing. He doesn't blow hard like a Freddie Hubbard or like a Clifford Brown. He's got a little bit more constraint, but he's certainly one of the brighter, bigger trumpet players out there. He just doesn't blow like the guy I'm about to show you, Freddie Hubbard. Freddie Hubbard shows up on the scene as a young cat, and the heir apparent to Clifford Brown is, without any question, Freddie Hubbard. Hubbard is just a lyrical, tempo-driven acrobat, and he plays with such... Now, here, I want to talk about clarity. He enunciates every syllable so clearly. It's just a phenomenal experience when you sit back and let Hubbard talk to you. Again, like Byrd, but even more so like Clifford Brown, every step on the roller coaster is going to get its equal due in tone, volume, and rhythmic precision. And there's nobody more rhythmically precise. Like a Swiss timepiece. Hubbard just runs through scales and chords, harmony and melody. He's such an intricate, but yet it's never just feels like it's blowing for the sake of blowing. It always feels very focused and very passionate. And the young Freddie Hubbard he just shows up with a bang. Tina Brooks is on this, and if my memory serves again, Tina Brooks is on this, and his record comes out either the same week or the week after, and the sales of this buried the Tina Brooks record that came out, True Blue. And it kind of hurt Brooks's career, and Brooks was having a pretty bad drug habit, which was part of the issue. And so it really forced Alfred Lyon's hand, and they kind of sidelined back to the tracks. And again, with Blue Note, money's an issue. Money's an issue. And so when the Brooks record didn't sell well, it meant they sat on the Brooks sessions for a while. And Minor Move just came out on Tone Poet, I believe it was, last year. But this is Kenny Drew, Undercurrent, number 4059. Again, great classic Blue Note album cover. Freddie Hubbard, Hank Mobley, Sam Jones, and Louis Hayes. Hubbard and Mobley are an interesting juxtaposition. It's always great to hear them together. But Kenny Drew is really the center of this piece. The way he does that kind of undercurrent with the piano, I spoke about it before. It's really a brilliant thing. And sadly, Kenny Drew goes to Europe. And for those of you who are big jazz fans, you all can tell me how, when a guy goes to Europe, how often he's very forgotten here in America. And like the Don Biases, a lot of the guys just go over there and just become unremembered, just forgotten. And Drew had a long recording career in Europe and makes some great sessions over there. I only have a few of them. When I start buying records again at some point, one of the things I'm going to have to do is start buying some more European stuff. But this is the great Horace Parlan. And it was hard for me to pick one of his records. He has 7, I believe, on Blue Note as a leader. 4082, so 1960 to about 1964, he's making this great string of records. A number of them are with Tommy and Stanley Turrentine. He does a record with the Three Sounds. No, I take that back. It's not with the Three Sounds. I can't recall what I'm thinking of. But this is with Booker Irvin. And Booker Irvin's a great Texas tenorman. He's got that Coltrane sound. He's often in the late 60s, the mid 60s, playing where Coltrane might have gone. More straightforward, straight ahead, more connected to the blues, but he's got the same blustery tone that's full of vigor and life. Grant Green gives it a bit of a cool, and Grant Green is as cool as Blue Note gets in a lot of ways. He's a very cool cat. George Tucker and Al Harewood round out the session. Al Harewood drums on a lot of Blue Note sessions. It's too bad he never got a session as a leader. One of my favorite records of all time is this Dexter Gordon record. And I'm a huge Dexter Gordon fan, as I've said many times. In some ways, when it comes to the saxophone especially, but in some ways you can speak on all jazz. Dexter Gordon is kind of this centerpiece in jazz. And he's a bridge between the swing and the bebop era into the hard bop era. And he wonderfully embodies the Websters and the Coleman Hawkins that came before him, Lester Young, but he also has a direct link to the Mobleys and the Rollins and the Coltranes that came after him. And in some ways it makes him this great centerpiece where everything that's before is there in Dexter Gordon, and everything that's after, boy, that sounds like Coltrane right there. This is Tanya. It's a great sidelong track here that just has this fantastic, nice swing to it. Recorded in Europe, Nils Henning Orsted, Art Taylor, Donald Byrd, and Kenny Drew, one flight up. And Dexter Gordon also spends a long time in Europe. And a lot of these guys just had enough of America, and I can't say I blame them. And Dexter Gordon, unlike Don Bias, unlike Kenny Drew, when Gordon comes back in 79, 80, whatever it is, Dexter is really embraced. And he's selling out these shows in New York and the whole fusion thing had kind of passed over, and trad jazz was having a bit of a rebirth, and Dexter Gordon's resurfacing was a very important moment in jazz in the 80s. Just as Jimmy Smith, it's a fun record. It's got Grant Green and Donald Bailey. It was recorded in 1963, right at the very end of his time at Blue Note. In fact, I feel like he's already gone by 63. It doesn't come out until 67. This is 4255. So this comes out not long before the sale to Liberty. But a great album cover. And when you have Grant Green and Jimmy Smith together, you have a hoedown. You just have what's called a good time. And you'll never go wrong when you have Jimmy Smith and Grant Green together. It's just always fun. And that's the important thing about Jimmy Smith's records. They sold really well, and they're really fun to listen to. And now, not a classic piece of the canon, but worthy of the canon is this piece that came out last year. Just Cool, maybe even this year. Just Coolin'. Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers from 1959. Lee Morgan, Hank Mobley, Bobby Timmons, and Jamie Merritt. And that's classic Messenger lineup right there. This is probably right on the heels of Moanin'. And so certainly in an era where you thought this would have found the light of day, and as to why it didn't, sometimes that's a real mystery. But again, the Messengers have 30 records on Blue Note, so it's an incredible body of work. So I guess it makes sense that some of it doesn't find the light of day. But what a great session. Again, Morgan and Mobley together are always fantastic. And Timmons, Merritt, and Blakey were the anchor of the Blue Note rhythm section and the Messenger rhythm section for a long time together. Timmons makes some great records on his own at Riverside that are worth digging out. Timmons is a great player. He actually wrote Moanin' and Dat Dare and a number of other great songs. Timmons was a great writer. Merritt's a great bass player who doesn't get much credit, doesn't get many records as a leader, if any at all. None at Blue Note for sure. And then Mobley and Morgan, of course, are legends. So it made sense that they put this out. Again, why this sat there for so long, it's hard to say. If I recall, this has never seen the light of day before until this recording this year, or this release this year. So a great piece, worthy of inclusion in the Blue Note canon, and there's just no body of work anywhere in jazz, probably in any musical forum, that compares to the Blue Note legacy. It's just such an incredible, if you look at every other label contemporaneously with what's going on here, the level of intensity, there's no misses. There's no novelty stuff. There's no one-off weird. It just, they don't do it. Alfred Lyon's stipulation for getting the track is you got to be pretty damn serious about this shit. So don't be showing up with some weird instruments and some people off the street and wanting to do a little shouting. It's got to be pretty serious war chant type of stuff for Alfred Lyon to even entertain it. And I think with some of the other labels, novelty was almost a way to get a paycheck. You know, here's something novelty. We're gonna do it with this weird thing, and labels were just like trying things. Blue Note had no interest in doing anything but what they were doing. And again, Alfred Lyon and Frank Wolf deserve so much credit for having the foresight, the stubborn dedication. It wasn't like they were reaping huge financial rewards from this. There's probably people in the industry now making more money off the Blue Note library than those guys made in their lifetimes, which is tragic and should be rectified somehow, but what do you do? But again, the just the level of sincerity that kept these guys so focused and allowed them to be so honest year after year. It's the magic ingredient that makes Blue Note what it is. And it's the thing that most people can't even put their thumb on. And as great as Riverside is, as great as Prestige is, as great as Verve is, there's something all those labels lack. And it's the ferocity and just blistering honesty that Blue Note indoctrinates all of its sessions in, especially in this period from 57 through 63, 64. There's just no misses. And one of the things that's really crazy, if you go to like the Penguin Jazz Guide, those big compendium books that have volume after volume of all the different albums from all the different eras, and you look at most artists and most labels, there's 1.5 star ratings, 3-star ratings, 3.5 star ratings, 4-star ratings, and most labels have a pretty wide variety of how their records are rated, how many stars they get. And honestly, this period we're talking about in Blue Note, everything is 3, 3.5, 4 stars out of 4. And a 2.5 star Blue Note is a rarity. And it's still great. And a lot of labels out there, 2.5 stars is a pretty highly rated record for their label. At Blue Note, that's a low score. And that's what partly was so impressive to me when I was doing my research back in the 90s, going through those books and learning about these artists I didn't know about. All these records, 4 stars, 3.5 stars, 4 stars, 3.5 stars, 3 stars, 3.5. It was just so consistent, title after title after title, and that really spoke to me. It really said there's something special going on there. And it's something that I think a lot of people just don't really have a thumb or a grasp of, what the magic is. And I've shared it before, but I felt it was time to share it again. So there's 15 Blue Notes that I love. Not so obvious, but still kind of obvious. I'm going to do a part 2 to this, where we do 15 Blue Note records that are a little much less obvious. And that's also going to be fun. Y'all be safe. Check out the Jazz Shepherd merchandise store. There's some cool t-shirts and hoodies in there. Happy holidays to everybody. We'll talk to you soon. Peace.